What I'm going to talk about is a review of the 4 pillars of public finance in Singapore from 59 to 2017, what drives the processes, and what are some of the unintended consequences, what are some proposed remedies for the future of Singapore. If you look at this mind mapping, there are 4 pillars. On the bottom left is the budget sector, the CPF, and on top of it, the Temasek, PIC, and MAS, and on the left upper top is the other sector which deals with Singapore bonds. The government has put forward the principles of good governance. Let's go through that quickly. It's on principle 1, meritocracy, 2 on religious and racial harmony, 3, clean government, and you also have inclusiveness, care for the environment, and rule of law. This is an illustration of Singapore budget process. It's some unique and innovative features. Fiscal rules are contained actually in our constitution. There are certain features such as block spending for each of the ministries with ceiling spending cuts across the board. But more interesting enough, it has a unique operating income concept which excludes investment income. This has really led to, from an implicit recognition of tight fiscal realities going forward, and the concept of total revenue is now up to half of annual realized net investment income, and it was revised in 2002. But most important of all, there's no reporting of what this net income is, and they also changed the constitution in 2012. If you go to the right hand side, you'll find that they have various features, but most important of all, there are no comparable performances of Singapore's fiscal performances by OECD standards. There's no transparency at all, and they don't follow the OECD guidelines. Okay? Why has the Singapore budgetary process been effective since 1976, when the total fertility rate was 2.1%? I believe that there is a number of unintended consequences, which I've termed Singapore paradoxes in its public finance. It has arisen simply because the pillars of public finance have gone largely unchallenged in terms of public governance versus good governance. And what are these public governance? It's really in terms of transparency, accountability, and timely reporting to citizens on full and accurate statements, the absence of which government of first world nation would not tolerate. Now contrast this to the Singapore government's zero tolerance in non-compliance in its corporate governance and financial reporting requirements. Now this, I would consider, is the implicit bedrock paradox underlying the elaboration of Singapore paradoxes on public finance. As you know, a paradox is self-contradictory because it contains 2 statements that are both true, but both of which cannot occur at the same time. And I think if you look at the Singapore budgetary process, this is a very useful tool to analyze what has been done. A number of Singapore paradoxes have evolved into the fabric of our society, in public finance especially. The first one of which is the rule of law versus rule by law. The second is the growing population versus declining total fertility rate. A state of the state versus the state of the state. Paradox number 4 is learning from the best versus we are the best. And the 4th one is the budget surplus versus rising costs. And number 6 is very interesting. What is said and what is done. 7 is the CPF money versus the very high special Singapore government securities indebtedness. 8 is meritocracy versus the soft channeling of the talent pool. 9, open economy versus closed mandate to change. 10, trust the government and its guarantees versus lack of public transparency. And number 11 has an impact on public finance in various town council. Win the GRC versus PA administration and face the glare of selective openness. Okay, the first paradox is rule of law versus rule by law, philosophy as adopted by the ruling party for the last 50 years. With the single party's long-established parliamentary majority to change the constitution, to pass all laws and enforce them rigorously, the substance of which, the philosophy of the Singapore government administration, is a rule by law. This is more akin to the Chinese legalistic autocratic doctrine in the period of the Warring States, leading to the establishment of the Qing dynasty, with its traditional twin handles of punishment and favors. Fa Zi, with the Chinese word of law and to govern, makes, and this is the key point, Singapore's rule of law as a subset of rule by law.
Are they contradictory, the terms rule by law and rule of law?
Okay.
I mean, if you say a subset, you're then subsuming rule of law under rule by law.
Because they've had control in the parliament, they are able to change, enact legislation, which is really open for interpretation by the court, which is rule of law.
Right.
Okay? But if you look at the amount of legislation that has been implemented through the years, there's very little ambit except for certain ratio decidendi which have been given. Now, if you look at the challenge that's been made by the first elected president in his 16th of July press conference in 1999, which forced the government to come up with a white paper on what are the principles governing the reserves. This is an area where they have actually implemented what is in the written constitution through convention by way of rule by law. Because if you look into an excess of this white paper, you will not be able to find Annex 2. Annex 2 has been removed. And Annex 2 actually have all the rules. The government has now gone to the height of totally ignoring what public comments are, because they've been given a 70% mandate in the last general election. I've wondered for a very long time as to how they've been able to do what they have done. And I was trying to find an underlying school of thought which fits into what they have been doing. And I think that this is one. There are twin handles of punishment and favor, and through the control of the social media, mainstream social media, they have come up with what I call, to favor them, a selective openness doctrine, which I will explain later. Selective openness permits them to focus on what they want people to see and to shield the citizens away from what they actually do, and through which they do not permit any unwanted public disclosure to enable the citizen to make informed choices and decisions, and to make any assessment of the use of government's total reserve and evaluate government's total accountability and trust, and more importantly, conduct any critical examination of budget statements. Left and top right-hand part is actually just for information, but the really important part is the northwest corner. This Chinese legalist school have been used by them to justify the single party. Okay, in the Qing warring states, they were at war, and it was autocratic doctrinaire. And in order to prevent chaos, they imposed this strict regime by which the orderly state should be returned. And our government has taken this model and put it upon themselves, and using the selective openness media and doctrine to hammer home into the people of Singapore that they are the only people that can save us from impending chaos if they're ever evicted from power. Okay? Then there are other reasons given. We are nimble, we are a small state, there's nobody else that can do it better than moi. Okay? Now, what are the dangers of this? And this is the Chinese transition risks. And we're now talking about the next generation, if they're not made of sterner stuff. Now, if the ruler of man do not insist on reserving to himself the right to dispense profit in the form of rewards and show his sternness in punishment, and this is the key point, and instead hand them out on the advice of his minister, the people will then fear the minister, hold the ruler in contempt. And this is the point. We, in my opinion, do not have a very strong leader. And I think, unknown to us, the cabal beneath him may be actually telling him to do X, Y, Z. And doing X, Y, Z would actually reflect on him at some later point in time, that he is not what he is and not like what LKY was. Okay, and this will form the seeds for the implosion of the ruling single party, and this is not good for us because there would not be an orderly transition of power. Rule by law on a protection of reserve, I've talked about it before. V.K. Raja have commented on it in 2015, made reference to the 1999 principle, which have stood to this day, and although they said that there should be due consultation between the elected president, views would be announced in Parliament, I have not seen too much of that being done. Okay? And this is a page of the 5-page document in 1999, and you see at the bottom right-hand corner, Annex 2 has been cut off. But it's interesting, the principles are based on generally accepted accounting principles, which they do not follow at all. Now, what is the rationale for public non-disclosure of size of GIC fund? I think the basic principle is that revealing the exact size of asset that GIC manages, which taken together with the published assets of MAS and Temasek, amounts to publishing the full size of Singapore Financial Reserve. But this is actually publicly available. And if you go to a later slide, which I have, the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund asset is about US 575 billion, around there. The government states that it is not in government's national interest to establish it, and that it would provide the basis for a speculative attack on Singapore during periods of vulnerability. Well, I don't think I would buy that. Basically, what we are left in Singapore is a Hobson choice. Hobson's choice is that in the old days, you went to the front of the stable, you could only show one horse, and you take it or leave it. There's no choice at all. So most of us are faced with a Hobson's choice. Now, this is taken from the MOF FAQ on who audits the financial statements of our investment entities. MAS financial statements are audited by Auditor General. The main companies in the GIC group and the government's portfolio managed by GIC are also audited by the Auditor General. And they said that the AG acts without fear or favor because of its position. Temasek's consolidated financial statements are also audited by leading international accounting firms. Financial performance is scrutinized is a key word, by bond rating agencies. Let's examine that. I've looked at the AG's report for the financial years 2008, 2009 to 2015 and 16, and did not actually find any coverage of any of the main companies in the GIC group and the government portfolio managed by GIC. What this means is that the Auditor General have not been able to challenge certain conflict of interest position vis-a-vis, say, Temasek. While, if you're aware, the AGO has actually examined the Aljunied Hougang Town Council in its report of 2016 and highlighted certain conflict of interest positions. So why was the AGO directed by the government and not the president to look at local political affairs? But I will talk about that later on in paradox 11, okay? Temasek's consolidated financial statements are audited by leading international audit firms, but these are not reported and are unavailable and are not made available to us, the citizens of Singapore. They are given AAA credit ratings, but the credit rating report are not publicly available. The key question to ask is what if these credit agencies should fail in the work as they did in the Lehman Brothers financial crisis? I'll just give you some example between the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Norwegian GPFG in terms of public governance and transparency. What I'm saying is that without any transparency, there's no clarity at all, and it's very difficult to assess and notice the quality of integrity. We are not saying that there are people with no integrity, but without any transparency and clarity on this, we, the citizens of Singapore, is unable to assess the quality of the integrity of the people that are currently sitting in Temasek that is making key investment decisions ostensibly on our behalf. As they say, sunlight is the best policy, and as there is no statement of policy return, there is no agenda for inclusiveness. the open and transparent sovereign wealth fund should foster trust, which it doesn't do. Now, very quickly to what the Norwegian Government Pension Fund, managed by Fonde, which is an agency, they have various parliamentary white papers, they have developed worst-case scenarios, they have built it up to US 873 billion. What else do? They have also put a cap to only making an investment of 5% in real estate. And this is a specific policy which has been done by an independent partner group, which is a Swiss partner group, which wrote this for the Norwegian Ministry of Finance. And they also tell us, or tell everybody who's interested, what is the current investment strategy, which dictates 60% equities, 35% fixed income, and only 5% in real estate, and break it down as to what the fixed income sectors are. So this is the figure which is taken from The Economist, and you can see that our Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund is US 575 billion. The second paradox is very interesting, because on the one hand, while Singapore's population is growing, our total fertility rate has been declining since 1976. Our population of PR to citizen have increased from 4% in 1980 to 23% in 2010. And this can only be explained by the goal for growth budgetary policies from 1990 to 2010, and later by the 2013 white paper on population. But underlying it, there's a much more subtle development going on, and this is a perception that the government needs to dynamically balance the fast population growth rate of non-citizens vis-a-vis the much faster growth in a particular ethnic sector, TFR, and which have to be adjusted to the historical population mix in HDB estates, for which they allocate people as to where they stay. Greater people inflow ostensibly should result in greater productivity growth, but more importantly, it will result in the retention of power in the next GE. So it is submitted that the population inflow has a political significance and bias, and which is to maintain the single-party rule, and the unintended consequences of making male citizen doing NS when it comes to post-NS employment. So these are some indicators to tell you how the proportion has moved from 4% to 21%. The figure showing the decline in total fertility rate to 1.20. Actually, the World Bank statistics is 1.19. What are the implications? If you look at the dependency ratio, we are not quite there with the Nordic countries. We are about 32. The government have not identified the root causes for the continuing TFR fall and addressed them in past budgets. And the 2017 budget is even more regressive in its fiscal effect on daily consumables, like significant cost increases in gas tariff, water rates, carbon tax, and SNSE charges for 15 PAP Town Council. What are some of these underlying causes? Male citizen PR marrying later, 90% of NS men making for a 10% NS core officer core. No reduction on NS policy on intakes and periods NS, despite the modern cyber warfare requiring 10% of conventional manpower. I just refer to the announcement that's made today in building on 88 hectares, a 900 million FBIU fighting and built up area facility. You really can't understand how you would have a modern 900 million facility where most training grounds for fighting in built-up areas are ramshackle places, simulate sort of blown out buildings and how you would attack them. And secondly, I think if Singapore will ever have to fight in a built-up area, I don't see that happening, okay, in a modern warfare. Let's take home pay after CPF, reliance on foreign workers, and this is the key part. Huge interest differential on investments from CPF money not returned, more expensive BTO fat, which actually replenishes our CPF savings, high cost of healthcare spending, not healthcare capital expenditure, but the cost of healthcare services is extremely high in Singapore, and it really hits a lot of people. Without actually having a HDB rental option, we will not be able to get people renting and living close to the place of work.
On housing CPF, what is the private debt ratio to GDP?
Okay, 61%.
What is debt over value?
Private household debt is 61% of GDP. Okay, I'll show you a trend where the percentage of household debt to GDP have risen considerably to that figure of 61%. And you add on to the figure, you will be able to work back how much the percentage of government debt is on Singapore special government securities. And the reason why that figure is important is because Singapore is, after Ireland, the most indebted nation in the world. Okay, and they issue special Singapore government securities not for fiscal reason, but mainly to make investment and earn a return which we do not know, which we will say is 6.5, and you compare that to the CPF return, the composite rate, I estimate they have earned 3.5% over 35 years period. And I tell you, I will show you my workings on it, and that sum is ginormous.